Hey basketball guys, we have news. Let's go to more news from the Golden State Warriors, but before that, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. The Warriors suffered another humiliating defeat to the Phoenix Suns, and the only way out will be drastic changes to this squad. Zach LaVine is available for trades. I ask, why is it taking so long to do business with the Chicago Bulls and bring in Zach LaVine? The interesting thing is to keep Andrew Wiggins and Jonathan Kuminga, along with Curry and Draymond Green and possibly Zach LaVine. Warriors executives have several players who are performing poorly or others who fluctuate between good and bad games. Players Schroeder, Buddy Hield, Kyle Anderson, Gary Payton II, Kevin Looney and Moses Moody could be involved in negotiations to obtain more solid players at the trade deadline. Warriors are interested in Zach LaVine and other players and also want to get rid of 5 players who have not shown that they can be champions with the Warriors: Buddy Hield, Kyle Anderson, Gary Payton II, Kevin Looney and Moses Moody. Involved in NBA trade rumors for much of the season, the Warriors remain linked to different star players. It was reported by Anthony Slater of The Athletic that Golden State is currently prioritizing Chicago Bulls guard Zach LaVine over Miami Heat forward Jimmy Butler. After taking conversations with multiple players, it seems Zach LaVine might pique more interest, depending on his cost, Slater wrote. Amid this report, Brett Siegel of Clutch Points stated, talks of LaVine heading to Golden State are very real and gaining momentum. Additionally, Siegel put together a hypothetical trade pitch that lands LaVine in Golden State while keeping Andrew Wiggins out of the deal. There is a path to landing LaVine without giving up Wiggins or Kuminga, Siegel wrote. The path involves leveraging Schroeder, Buddy Hield, Kyle Anderson, Gary Payton II, Kevin Looney, and possibly even Moses Moody. LaVine is in the 3rd season of his 5-year, $215 million contract with the Bulls, which makes acquiring him extremely complicated. This is especially the case if Golden State wants to keep Wiggins, the 2022 NBA All-Star who is averaging 17.4 points in 41 games this season. If Golden State can acquire LaVine without giving up Wiggins, it could boast a starting lineup that includes a lot of firepower. Averaging 24.0 points on 51.1% from the field and 44.6% from three-point range, LaVine has been one of the NBA's most efficient volume scorers this season. Paired with 11-time NBA All-Star Steph Curry, LaVine could give Golden State one of the NBA's best backcourt duos. As for the additional details of such a deal, Siegel broke down a scenario. In a hypothetical situation, the Warriors could bring back LaVine and Talen Horton-Tucker from Chicago while finding common ground on a deal to unload salaries to the Charlotte Hornets for Nick Smith Jr., Seth Curry, and Taj Gibson to round out the back end of their roster with minimum contracts, Siegel wrote. This is a complicated trade pitch, but one that lands Golden State a high-level secondary scoring option next to Curry. Steve Kerr knows Warriors can't stand pat at trade deadline. The Golden State Warriors are under construction. Or, at least, they should be. With the trade deadline's clock winding down, Warriors head coach Steve Kerr admits that his team is not in a position to say let's stand pat, per ESPN's own Young Masuk. He does believe that his current roster is good enough to be a playoff team and won't ring the alarm if Warriors general manager Mike Dunleavy Jr. doesn't make a move before February 6. Nevertheless, the basketball lifer could hardly have been any more clear about what he wants to see their front office do. For Golden State, the question isn't whether they should make a trade but what trade they should make. Steve Kerr knows Warriors can't stand pat at trade deadline. The Warriors have been linked to several upper echelon players. To everyone's surprise, they called the Los Angeles Lakers about league legend LeBron James ahead of last season's trade deadline. In the offseason, James's name was still being mentioned in connection to the Warriors, especially as he was thriving alongside Stephen Curry on Team USA. However, Golden State's focus was more so on Paul George and Jimmy Butler, who were embroiled in contract disputes. George resolved his situation by inking a massive deal with the Philadelphia 76ers, but Jimmy Butler's situation stayed the same. As a result, the Warriors were and perhaps still are regarded as a potential suitor for the disgruntled star. Running with the Bulls. If the calculus on Butler has changed, it's likely because his behavior has raised eyebrows. Zach LaVine. In fact, Chicago Bulls veteran Zach LaVine, who has displayed more maturity and professionalism this season, is regarded as a safer option. With that being said, LaVine has always made more sense in terms of his fit on paper. He doesn't definitely offer as much help as Butler defensively but is excellent from outside. With prolific three-point shooting a Warriors staple, there's not much more they could ask for. The issue is that LaVine's albatross contract would likely lead to the Warriors having to trade Andrew Wiggins. Not that Golden State is against the idea of moving the former number 1 pick. The cost-benefit analysis just looks a little different when talking about trading him for LaVine instead of Butler. Though LaVine looks like a match for the Warriors offensively, they've been relying on Wiggins for defense as much as offense. Thus, they may consider it more feasible to move him for Butler, another two-end player. Nikola Vucevic. If Golden State were to trade for anyone on the Bulls roster, Nikola Vucevic seems like the most likely candidate. Not only does Vucevic make less than half of LaVine's salary, he plays a role that the Warriors find particularly useful. At 6'10", he's shooting over 39% from 3 this season. As a spacing big, he could help them counter the way that opposing teams are guarding Curry. In theory, he could also help clear the lane for Jonathan Kuminga when he returns, especially as teams are unlikely to guard him with smaller players. To this point, Golden State hasn't been willing to meet the Bulls' demand for Vucevic, a first-round pick. However, given Kerr's latest comments, they just might. Alternative trade options. If the Warriors are going to trade a first-rounder for a big man, Indiana Pacers center Miles Turner might be the better option. He's more than 5 years younger, more reliable beyond the arc, and a better shot blocker. If they're set on holding on to their firsts, Utah Jazz forward center John Collins is a stretch big who'll presumably have a lower price tag. Bulls forward center Jalen Smith and New York Knicks center Precious Achiuwa could fit the bill as well. The untouchables, which Warriors players should be off-limits in trade talks. It's a short list. From what looked like a rather uninspiring trade deadline for the Golden State Warriors, all of a sudden the franchise is back in the mix for some of the biggest names that could be on the move over the next week. Despite their excellent performances on Wednesday, neither of the trio are going to become untouchable based on one game. So, who are Golden State's untouchable players ahead of next week's trade deadline? Let's take a look. Stephen Curry. As the Warriors have stumbled down the standings over recent weeks, there has been growing speculation on Stephen Curry's future and whether the franchise should be open to moving its best-ever player. Depending on what happens over the remainder of the season, that's a conversation that could arise more prominently in the summer. For now, Curry not only remains clearly untouchable, but he also can't legally be traded after signing an extension in August. Jonathan Kuminga. Many fans would argue this shouldn't be the case, but based on the latest reporting, the Warriors once again appear eager to wed themselves to Jonathan Kuminga. According to Anthony Slater and Marcus Thompson, 2 of The Athletic on Wednesday, Kuminga is considered essentially off the table for any deal involving Butler or LaVine. If that's the case and the currently injured Kuminga remains with Golden State past the deadline, then the front office and ownership best be prepared to hand him a significant contract extension as a restricted free agent. Letting the 22-year-old walk for nothing in the offseason would be a disaster. Brandon Podziemski. If the Warriors weren't prepared to trade Brandon Podziemski in a deal for Lauri Markkanen during the offseason, why should they consider moving the young guard now after his value has fallen? If anything, Podziemski's lower value should mean they double down on the hope of him becoming an all-star in the future, particularly after some really positive signs just prior to and upon return from an abdominal injury. The other big element with Podziemski is that he's still got 2 years left on his rookie contract. In today's age of the first and second tax aprons, having an impactful player on such minimal money is incredibly valuable. Of course, both Podziemski and Kuminga aren't fully untouchable and would be moved in the right scenario, but none of the players the Warriors have been linked to so far are worth giving up either young player. 4. Draymond Green. You could make a strong case that the Warriors should actually consider Draymond Green, not Wiggins, as the big salary piece to move in a Butler or LaVine trade, particularly if they're going to recommit to Kuminga as their power forward of the future.